welcome to Solved, the political discussion show for people with attention spans and those looking to develop one. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning podcast Best of the Left, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Today, we're going to solve the problem of human alienation by sparking a new movement for beauty and democratic civic engagement to make our built environment a place we can once again feel connected to. So just that. I don't know. I mean, you might have your doubts, but you'd be wrong. Actually, as I was writing the intro for the show today, I imagined a member of the audience being like, bullshit, you're not going to do that. And besides, like, I don't have the time or attention span probably to find out. And so then the member of the audience would like fast forward all the way to the end, just be like, just tell me what you're planning, which made me think maybe we should do that for people, right? Like, this show is for people with attention spans, ostensibly, and those looking to develop one. And that's a concept that's already going against the prevailing wisdom of content creation. And so why not just break another convention and give away the answer rather than stringing people along? So it'd be like a murder where you know what happens, but then the mystery becomes how and why, right? So as an experiment, let's give it a try. Editor, if you would please, present the people with our rousing conclusion. This year, Art Deco, one of my favorite design styles, turned 100 years old. And so as we close out 2025, we are leaving you with a call to spark a new movement for beauty with a sort of modern twist. Our aesthetic environment, from Millennial Gray interiors to gray box fast food restaurants, exposes what our economic system truly values: profit over beauty, convenience for capital over meaning for people. But history, in the form of the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements, shows another way. They emerged during similar periods of economic transition and technological disruption, offering clear philosophical alternatives to what was then the dominant utilitarian thinking of the time. They proved that movements for beauty can reshape entire cultures. And we now understand that beauty has real substantive value that's worth the cost. I'm not saying they didn't know that 100 years ago, but it does feel like we forgot it for a little while. Plus, we understand that people want it. They have been pushed to the point, just like with COVID and Millennial Gray, like they've been pushed to the point that they recognize they want something different and are willing to demand something other than what market forces would grant. Today, we have new tools that they lacked 100 years ago. We can have much better participatory planning that helps democratize design decisions, proven regulatory mechanisms that help improve public beauty and insist on aesthetics being legally binding. And so what we need now is to sort of unite these elements into a cohesive movement with a clear identity, compelling vision, and democratic foundation. So it's not beauty imposed from above, particularly when coming from a single dude with no taste, but beauty created through collective action, communities reclaiming the right to shape spaces that reflect human values rather than market logic. So I've been pondering names for this. You know, I'm a fan of the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements. And so what I came up with is I'm proposing like Art Populi or Art Civis, Art for the People, or Art of the Citizens, something like that. Just proposals. And so now we need artists and designers to jump in. Like, this is not our job, but write manifestos, build coalitions, design their designs, and bring beauty back to the people. Okay, that's it. So the people now know where we're headed, and the mystery is only that they need to find out how we get from here to there. Although, interestingly, I will mention that the team here is in the opposite situation because they know all the topics we're going to cover, but I haven't shared my rousing conclusion with them yet. So basically, everyone should stick around and see how this pans out.
I was going to leave, but I guess I'll finish the podcast now.
I appreciate it. I appreciate anyone who sticks around, including those of you actively participating in the conversation. So, as with every journey, we begin with our first step, which is into the cold embrace of a modern fast food establishment with the article from Delish. Why do all fast food chains look like boring gray boxes now? And first, they give the history, and it says, quote, many of the fast food chains we know today originated from the 1940s through 60s as standalone restaurants. They were designed either in the space-age Googie architecture of the time, a futuristic mid-century style defined by bold angles, sweeping roof lines, and neon signage meant to capture the attention of passing drivers, or leaned more heavily into a brand theme, like the original Taco Bell, for example, which looked like a Spanish mission, though it also had a very colorful sign. And then skipping ahead, they explain what has gone so horribly wrong. It says, quote, today's restaurants aren't designed to last as they are. With rising costs and frequent closures, every new build has to be generic enough to flip into another chain if the franchisee doesn't succeed. A gray, boxy exterior isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a business strategy. After all, it's much easier to lease an old Pizza Hut location to a McDonald's, for example, if it doesn't have that distinctively shaped Maynard roof. You know the one? End quote. Does anyone have any emotional attachments to fast food restaurant shapes?
I couldn't find the article. I wanted to look for it, but there's an article about businesses that used to be Pizza Huts I read either a year or two ago. And there's just, all kinds of different places that have that distinct roof. So you can tell it used to be a Pizza Hut, but now it's something else. So I don't know if I agree with the concept of why they do what they do, because they could still be something else. You just know that it used to be a different place. I guess McDonald's would not want a place that looked like a Pizza Hut, but a real estate agency might not care. It's very limiting to just decide that everything has to be a box. And I am kind of attached to the old. I saw the old Taco Bell. Like, I love the old Taco Bell. I used to play basketball in the park, and we go to the Taco Bell afterwards, and it looked like that. And now they all look like everything else. It's just nostalgia. Is this the feeling of nostalgia I'm having right now for Taco Bell?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Circuit City, same thing. Circuit City was a very recognizable building, and other businesses have moved into it. And, unless you knew what Circuit City looked like when in its heyday, maybe you just think it's a uniquely designed building. But yeah, I mean, the box, like, while I understand all the reasons why, is that the only point of building a structure in a community? Is it so that it has resale value and universal use value? Yeah, I think it's more than that. And I think that's what we might get into today.
I will fully admit the nostalgia that came up for me, specifically about the Taco Bell. And I wouldn't even say I ate Taco Bell a lot, but just like the look of it took me right back to that place. Like, I didn't need to say Taco Bell, I would know what it was. And I do feel like we've kind of lost something. I don't want to say the funny thing, but almost is that this is also now a preference. Like, people will talk about how they like sleek, modern architecture. And you see it in like homes, especially that will be built new, but they're like a 2-story box. They're like, oh, look how modern it is. And it's usually people who can afford a nice chunk of change on the house. But to me, it's an eyesore. It looks so ugly. And it almost always, unless you put it in a neighborhood with a bunch of other houses that look similar, it just sticks out and not in a good way.
My mom has one on her street, and it's a old Victorian era city. So there's a lot of pretty Victorian houses in the neighborhood, and then one giant modern box. Could not look more out of place.
And in Atlanta, I wouldn't say that we even have that kind of historic look, but all of the houses do have a general aesthetic to them. And so houses that veer from it tend to stand out. And I could make some, like, leeway for that if it was a really intricate architecture, like, you put money into the design of it and it, like, was aesthetically pleasing. But a box that's, again, just, like, 2 stories kind of looking over other one-story homes, just an eyesore.
Yeah.
Just you can tell yourself what you need to. It's not a good look for me.
So as you guys were talking about Taco Bell, I was remembering that I had a birthday party at Burger King, like at a physical Burger King location in my town. And I don't know, is that a thing anymore? Like, it wasn't just me. A lot of my friends had birthday parties in a Papa Gino's or a Burger King or a McDonald's. And like, I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. Deon, maybe you know because you have a kid who's around that right age.
So we had in our town a Burger King that still had a play area, and it closed because Burger King's closing a lot of locations. I remember specifically having a birthday party at a McDonald's, and there is one restaurant, there's a Chick-fil-A that has a playground, indoor play area for kids. And I don't know if they do birthday parties because it's a really small place,
Mm-hmm.
but it does have that play area. So I don't know that fast food restaurants generally do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this one didn't even have a play area. Like, we just went and ate food, and I
Oh.
think they gave us some games to play. Like, it was like a,
Yeah.
packaged thing where you could have a birthday party at the
Yeah.
fast food chain. I'm looking at these redesigns thinking, what would be the point? Because it looked
They don't want you
interesting
in there.
inside. Yeah, like it looked interesting inside
Yeah.
when we, back then. So why would that even be a thing now? And, we all got crowns to wear,
Yeah,
Paper
I'm sure
crowns.
they would much prefer you go through the drive-through, get a party's worth of food, and leave them alone.
Yeah.
That's what Burger King would prefer these days. All right, so we're sort of zooming out from corporate, box establishments and why they build them. But I guess the lesson we're taking from that is the reasons are structural, that there are business reasons why they're doing that. There's, it's not like CEOs of companies are having a change in their personal design aesthetic and they're imposing it on us. It's a business reason that reflects business, right? So now we come at all of this from a slightly different angle. Came across a YouTube video recently. How did the world get so ugly? It's hosted by a guy who walks around London, particularly around the Thames River, and looks at elements of London that sort of highlight the change in design philosophy over the last like 150 years. So, walking along the embankment of the Thames, he points to a couple of lamps. One is like new and black and sleek and looks like a street lamp. And then he goes to the other antique lamps that line the embankment. And here's what he says, quote, "These two lampposts don't just look different, they represent fundamentally different worldviews. If you want to understand any society, don't listen to what it says about itself. Look at what it creates," he says. And then going on, he explains, quote, "The Victorians took great pride in their embankment and thought it needed appropriately grand and dramatic decoration. See, these lamps were among the first public electric lighting in the world. This was a radical, revolutionary new technology. Crowds literally gathered to watch them be lit up for the first time. What the iPhone was in 2007, these lamps were in 1870. And I mean, I guess I'll pause and ask, like, can anyone imagine the unveiling of something like that that would be like genuinely beautiful and highly decorated today, the way those Victorian age lamps were highly decorated in their high esteem?
Certainly not infrastructure, maybe a bridge. I think that's the only thing I can think of, but nothing is.
Oh, bridges are allowed to be pretty.
Yeah, they can be
Yeah.
pretty and they're a big deal, but a street lamp, I can't really imagine such a thing.
Yeah. Everything was once new and exciting and then it becomes commonplace over time. And so, like, street lamps are one of those things. It's like we're not excited about street lamps the way Victorians might be. But yeah, I was trying to think of any public infrastructure that might be new and interesting, or just like new and we decided to make it super pretty. And yeah, you might be right. Like bridges, they, for some reason, we've decided those are allowed to be pretty.
Did we talk about the project in Japan where they did multiple public restrooms and they made the aesthetic like
Yeah.
really appealing. Okay.
But before YouTube, we talked about that. So good to bring it up.
Okay. Yeah, and what it does, one, they're well taken care of, and two, it makes the experience enjoyable. And what I would say is here in the States, can I imagine that happening here? Nope. Like, who's making money from it would be like number one question when thinking about any kind of infrastructure. To just have something that is for public good and is aesthetically appealing, like it is really hard to imagine.
A lot of cities are doing exactly the opposite. They are making infrastructure homeless proof. They're making it so that
Mhm.
people can't sit very long, can't stay very long, don't want to be around it at all. And that the message is very clear. Don't be here, which is the
Mhm.
opposite of, these ornate light posts that make you want to just sit and contemplate and think, oh wow, somebody put a lot, especially back before the mass manufacturing, that must have been a real artistic project that took a lot of time and effort. So it was worth people looking and feeling proud that that was in their city. And now we've got benches that you can't sit on and stoops that you can't skateboard near. Like we have a different mindset. And I think it is reflected in the way our society treats each other.
Hostile architecture.
Yeah, hostile architecture. That's what Deon is referring to. It's actually got a name where people put thought into how to make architecture hostile to humans so that they will go away. That's one way to build society. It's not what we would necessarily recommend, though. So the dude in the video goes on and says that, quote, those lampposts don't look modern to us now. They look quaint and old fashioned. Why? Because they are decorated. We don't associate decoration with cutting edge technology. And that's a major difference between us and the Victorians in the 19th century. They saw no contradiction between startling modernity and time honored tradition, end quote. And he then goes on to do the same with a sewage pumping station, showing that the old one was nearly as decorated as like a cathedral, if you can imagine, while the new one is what you might also be able to think of. It's like concrete slab behind a chain link fence. And if you saw one in real life, you would just think industry, don't know what it does. And, and it looks very uninviting. But this is where he gets to the absolute key word of the century, I think. And he says, quote, will this, referring to the new, very boring concrete pumping station, will this, like the original, be turned into a museum? Maybe. In any case, I imagine that it is more functional and that it was more convenient to build, to design. Convenient. Now that's an important word, he says. And to me, like that's almost everything. And that is what sparked this entire conversation, is the realization that the drive for convenience is a word that I think people can latch onto a little bit better than like the drive for the profit motive. Because you think, well, profit motive, that's what businesses do. But the drive for convenience, that's what people do. And it's like the lowest hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing. It's like, well, yeah, like as a person, I like for things to be convenient. That feels good or luxurious or like an upgrade from whatever I did before, in kind of that same way that, like, well, a business has a drive to be more profitable. People, I don't know that I agree with this instinct, but surely have it myself, is we have this drive for convenience. And that in turn drives a huge amount of economic activity and capitalistic movement that is catering to people's desire for convenience. So that's going to continue to play a role in this conversation.
And of course, as you asked earlier, for whom, convenience for whom is a big part of that equation. And so is it actually convenient for people, real people who wander around in the world, or?
Absolutely. No, I had this thought before we started. I thought, okay, try answering this question. Which is more convenient, having bottles of milk delivered to your front door or going to the grocery to get your milk? The answer is pretty obvious. And so if we're a society obsessed with convenience, then why do we have to go to the store to get our milk, right? it turns out maybe it's not actually the convenience of individual people we're catering to, which means the whole idea of convenience is structural and restrained by larger forces beyond our control, and that there are forces that are more important than people's individual convenience. And the convenience of what is better for the movement of capital definitely trumps what would be convenient or better for people.
I also wanted to touch on pride, because when I watched this video, he's talking a lot about how the Victorians felt about things, and sort of a sense of pride is underlying a lot of this, right? Yes, it's modern, yes, it's new, but also we, the city of London, have this. And so we're unique and special, and we're marking that by making it beautiful, right? That's sort of the undercurrent of the whole thing. And so I was thinking a lot about, like, where does a town, a city, a state, even national pride, like, where does it come from? And it kind of comes from thinking you're unique, that your place, where, your corner of the earth has something special about it. And it can't just be beauty, obviously. Like, pride doesn't only come from beauty. Like, I'd love to be proud of a healthcare system or education system or prison system. And and maybe someone might think that's silly, but there are countries that have these things and are proud of them because they've done them well. The UK, Finland, Denmark being some of them. And they have beautiful things too. And so it got me wondering about, like, does one flow from the other? If we had more beauty around us in our daily lives and in basic infrastructure, would that then inspire us to want more? Because what good is a bunch of pretty buildings if you don't take care of the people around those buildings? And perhaps your pride in the beauty could make you want to take care of people who are existing in your community, because, well, maybe seeing unhoused people next to a very pretty metro station is a bit too much for your cognitive dissonance, and maybe you want to fix that. And I don't have any scientific evidence to back this up, but it just got me thinking about how these things kind of work together and can flow back and forth. You may pass by something pretty every day without thinking about it, but if you're seeing a harsh contrast, either with another person you're seeing or just how your life actually is while passing by something beautiful, that might spark something in you. You might say to yourself, I think I want more. I think I want this to be better for everyone.
This reminded me, in like a kind of an inverse effect of this, it's the broken windows policing policy in New York,
Mm-hmm.
where police would go, where the broken windows are, that's where all the crime's going to be. And just addressing the aesthetics from a policing policy, and not why does it look that way? Why can't we make it look better? What do we do to improve the situation to where these people are living in homes that have broken windows? And if we were to funnel more money into the beautification as opposed to the policing aspect, maybe things would be better. Maybe if people did live in nicer places, if there was a better funded infrastructure just in general for all these things, like Amanda was talking about with healthcare, all that stuff, maybe there would be less need for policing, because people would have a sense of pride in where they're from, as opposed to, I think, animosity. I think a lot of people have animosity from where they're from because of just how brutal circumstances are, how much more difficult things are, how ugly things are around them. And if there was more just emphasis put on this beautification process, maybe the results would be less need for policing. It'd be cool if we tried it. I don't know if there's a way to find out unless we did it, but right now we're not. Again, New York specifically is investing a lot in hostel architecture, so that's not a priority for the city of New York.
Okay, so continuing with the discussion of structural forces, but moving from civic construction, the built environment around us, to our very personal spaces, that brings us to another YouTube video I came across recently, Why Millennials Have No Taste. I have to admit, this was a new concept for me because I am not on the internet the way you're supposed to be. I guess people have been hearing about Millennial Gray since like 2013. Has everyone been confronted with this atrocity that we all
Yeah.
apparently lived through and knew about it before now?
Oh, for sure.
Some of us more than others.
Yeah, I was also going to ask, did anyone, aside from hearing about it, did anyone live through and experience Millennial Gray in a real visceral way?
No.
Lies.
I was like, they laugh because I read these and said I specifically felt called out because I have a gray couch and the walls in the main area are gray. But we have artwork and every other room in the house is very colorful.
Mhm.
But I would like to say, for the record, all 4 of us are sitting here with our little boxes and all of us have like pretty colorful walls. I don't know if that saves, but I did relate to the reasons why we lean towards gray. And I also did come from like renting places where the rule is if you paint it, you have to paint it back.
Mhm.
So more often than not, we just didn't paint.
Yeah.
So I'm used to a pretty bland background, I guess.
Right. So this YouTuber speaks with a color expert from a home paint company who pointed to around 2008 as the beginning of Millennial Gray. And when I hear the year 2008, two things come to mind immediately. Number one, the iPhone had launched the year before. And number two, the housing crisis was like about to land. And the YouTuber doesn't hit the technology angle like super hard, but it is there. And it's, you know, not only the design of phones themselves that obviously have become ubiquitous and have been influential in design language, but the look and feel of software and the internet, it turns out, began to change around that time to accommodate smartphones. And so physical and digital design started shifting toward minimalism with the help of smartphones. Meanwhile, pre iPhone and pre housing collapse, people were spending a lot of money on renovations because they had this belief like you basically can't lose money in a house until the crash. And that taught everyone a lesson. But people were doing a lot of renovations. And apparently, what was trendy at the time was pretty elaborate, sort of Tuscan style earth tones with lots of ornamentation. And so millennials moving out of their parents' houses were like moving out of these houses that might have looked like that, like very warm and maybe cluttered feeling. And so people rebel the way they do, and minimalism would have looked appealing to them at that time. And it turned out, like, with the help of the housing crash, the market was like more than happy to shift in that direction and then do this push and pull thing where people were maybe shifting toward minimalism, and then the market didn't just follow people's desires, but then also shifted so hard it pushed people in that direction. So, I mean, Erin, as you said, renting and not repainting walls, you end up with whatever aesthetic the landlord has presented for you. And so some people in the video mentioned like it may not just be millennial gray, but more like landlord gray, and that super flat, neutral tone that like will be inoffensive to anyone until the point that it becomes ubiquitous, at which point it becomes offensive to everyone, essentially. But then the businesses also got on board. This is all post crash, right? So from the video, she explains, quote, restoration hardware increased revenue by increasing prices and neutralizing color palettes to target a wealthier clientele whose homes usually look more like high-end hotels, end quote. And, continuing quote, on the other hand, IKEA cut costs by sharply reducing their number of catalog goods. An analysis of their catalogs published from 1991 to 2021 shows a rise in gray at the cost of colors. So millennials wanted minimalism, and when they were old enough to enter the housing market, they got a sea of gray houses with gray furniture, end quote. So again, some personal choice involved, but huge structural forces at play, nudging and pushing people in that same direction.
I lived through this as well. And what I remember from this era was not only the shift to neutrals and minimalism, which, like, minimalism was a movement. I think it's worth saying that. Like, it wasn't just a thing some people were into. Like, we actually met the minimalists who had a podcast and did a movie. And it was, the help of social media made that go far and wide. You had Marie Kondo telling you to only keep the stuff that brings you joy. Like, there was a lot happening, right? And it was a rejection of mostly what we all grew up with, which was a lot of stuff. And, however you feel about that is fine, but that is what this was in response to. And what I remember also at the same time was this shift into being really into interior design. That was actually very cool and the thing to be into at that period as well. So it's interesting to me. It's like there wasn't a lot of cool stuff to do with it because it was mostly neutrals that were in, but the whole concept of interior design was a thing. All of my friends and I followed like interior design experts or influencers. We tried to make our places look like Restoration Hardware without that budget at all. It was also the recession. And so people are responding to, I want to look like I have more money than I have. How do I do that? Make everything matchy, beige and gray. And then everything will look more upscale, even if it's $20 from IKEA. And so, like, there was this whole, all these things mixed in together. And the rise of social media. Like, I think, in an episode before YouTube, we talked about how the rise of social media like has been flattening personal design and personal style. And this is another one of the things that was impacted. So it's a big swirling economic response in addition to these like personal feelings of what you grew up with, all kind of coming together. And of course, it's cheap. Like, gray, not color, beige, not color, is cheaper. And companies like IKEA, Restoration Hardware figured that out too. And so they could, especially Restoration Hardware, they could sell at a premium something that took, probably half the cost to make because it was the cheaper fabric.
So the lesson I want us to take away here is not just the structural forces that pushed a whole generation of people into living in gray boxes. The lesson is about how we got out of it. So the video says, what killed Millennial Gray? And it says, since COVID started, people started to work from home and they started to invest in home design. So in short, structural forces pushed people into this situation, but people simply got fed up and decided it was time to do something different because it was important to them. Like, they realized what had happened and thought, we can do something different. So does free will. So does the human capacity to make a decision that is not purely based on market forces. It is not like, well, what is the absolute cheapest thing I can do? Once people had been pushed to a certain kind of extreme, they then realized, okay, well, we've gone too far and we've actually lost something that we valued. And maybe it took losing it to realize what we valued, but we do, and we need some of that back. And so Millennial Gray became, the video sort of describes it as the only reason we named it was so that we could kill it. People needed to wrap their minds around this thing that everyone sort of was coming to the realization that they hated so that they could have something to fight against. All of which must be making you think, like we've talked about business, we've talked about civic, personal, and so you must be thinking, thank God we finally have a president known for having impeccably good taste. Because all this brings us to CNN. Trump executive order mandates classical architecture for federal buildings, discourages brutalism. And this one's complicated and also not that complicated. This is one of the few things I've ever heard from Trump that I'm like mostly agree with, because I hate brutalism. Ironically, our new editor who we've just brought on is the only human I've ever met in real life who likes brutalism. So it's as though we created this conversation topic to just kind of fuck with Dan a little bit. So apologies to Dan.
Sorry, Dan.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm on board with being anti-brutalism, but Trump did this originally back in 2020, right? And the backlash, like the anti-Trump backlash to the pro-classical architecture was that's what a Nazi would do, which is not incorrect. It's just, maybe all Nazis like classical architecture, but not all classical architecture fans are Nazis. That kind of a problem. And so, Trump, we don't have to dance around it anymore. Like, he's clearly a fascist. And so that is obviously why he's doing that. However, classical architecture is more beautiful than brutalism or some of the other things that we've done over the last half century or whatever. Where I would try to find some nuance in that discussion is Trump's demanding classical architecture. And so the left and like Biden came in and repealed that mandate and everything. The left was critical of it on anti-fascist grounds, which is fine. But what we should be in favor of is beauty. And classical architecture is not the only way to create beauty. It's one of the ways. Mandating it and insisting on only classical architecture so that we can rebuild ancient Rome over and over again is a little bit fascist. Demanding beauty is not fascist. So in that sense, I'm happy to make common cause with conservatives who've written lots of articles about what a great thing it was that Trump has finally tried to put an end to the era of brutalism. And I don't even know all the architectural terms that describes where we have ended up building a lot of ugly buildings for reasons that cannot be sufficiently justified when they're being built in the name of the people and people sort of overwhelmingly don't like them.
Also, I kind of take a little bit of issue with this is from the president of the National Civic Arts Society, and he was going on and on about how excited he is about Trump's decision because, this is the time-honored, timeless, and most associated with our national values, and that is the architecture of American democracy. And I understand that from a very high-level perspective, but we had a lot of influences. Why not bring all the rest of those in too? Like, Native American tribes also contributed to our understanding of our democracy and inspired it. So, this idea that it has to be one way and only that way is beautiful is just, it's ridiculous. And it also, if we are talking about how do we represent ourselves, how do we represent the ideals, there's more than just Corinthian columns to express that can be beautiful.
From my hometown, I've got an example across the street from each other, kind of adjacent on one of the main streets in town. A giant parking lot got turned into a performing arts center, and it's beautiful. It's not classical, it's kind of more modern, but it's really pretty. It will be pretty forever. And across the street, they built a new courthouse that is just this brutalist brick, and it's bigger than the performing arts center and uglier. And I get the urge to not want to do that anymore, because it's like, if you drive down that road, you see both of them at the same time, and it's jarring. And I don't know why that was allowed to happen, but that's just the way things work in a small town, I guess. But there is a real need to not do that anymore, because I get the idea that the courthouse is supposed to be imposing. I guess that's what they were going for. But in a town over, there's this courthouse from the 1800s that is beautiful. It's whatever you would think an old school, pretty building in a town square would look like. It's that. And that will also always be pretty. That courthouse we have in my town, it's ugly now. It's going to be uglier next year. It's going to get uglier going forward. It will never look good. And why we insist on doing that is the reason why you could have some people saying, well, maybe we should just do this classical architecture mandate. That does make sense, because I don't want any more brick prison looking buildings. Like, we've got several schools in that town that look like prisons. And then we've got some newer ones that have been built that look great, but they aren't classical either. It doesn't have to be like that. Like Jay was saying, it's beauty is more important. And thinking things through like long term. Would you want to see this every single day? Like, I don't know that that happens a lot. I think a lot of it is, cost effective. 90-degree angles are easier to build. Boxes are easier to build than ornate structures. It's efficiency. It's convenient, but what's that going to look like for the rest of the time that it's there?
I also just have a really hard time getting on board with submitting to the aesthetic of someone who uses gold leaf like millennials use gray. So I agree about classical architecture being pretty, but I don't think that's the only beauty that we can find in buildings. I'm more in line because I was thinking about, okay, so instead of this mandate, in line with what Jay was saying about mandating beauty, what would that actually look like? I think a citizen review board, maybe, like where they actually get to have input on, especially like government or public buildings. That way, the town has input on the aesthetic and if it matches the other buildings. Because there are some towns that have a strong architecture leaning, I guess, as far as style is concerned, that classical architecture may look weird in. Like it may not match what the town is actually going for. So I think getting more citizens involved in what the approved plan would be the route to go, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But dialing back to where you started, speaking of gold leaf and Trump's taste, Amanda reminded me that, like, I don't even know how long ago, months ago, Deon, you made a comment about how Donald Trump is Biff Tannen from the Back to the Future series.
Oh,
And
Absolutely.
did you know that that's literally true? Or
Yeah.
was that just like, yeah.
No,
I had no idea. I had no idea. Amanda and I have been like on a little bit of a Back to the Future riff recently. So we just watched Back to the Future 2, and Biff gets rich because of time travel. And we're like, oh my God, he's so obviously Donald Trump. That's what Deon was talking about. Was that intentional? Because it seems like it absolutely must be. And the answer is yes. Like in the 80s, when they were making those movies, they were making fun of Donald Trump, literally Donald Trump, the individual, in the form of Biff Tannen having incredibly poor taste in every way, which I found like striking or something.
And a casino owner.
Right. But this is why people like Donald Trump have to say that they like classical architecture from ancient Rome or, neoclassical that Washington, D.C. is built into, because it's like, it's the only taste that is like passable and that they can get on board with, because like anything more interesting than that, they will head in a wrong direction. They will say like, it needs to have more ornamentation and more gold on it and more flashing lights or whatever, because they genuinely have terrible taste. And then the rest of us get stuck with it. That's an aside, though. I just want to point out that this article about Trump's executive order says the order calls for the construction of federal buildings in a way that, quote, uplifts and beautifies public spaces and, this is my favorite, commands respect from the general public, end quote. And I was just like, that's such a phrase. Like, I feel like beauty sort of earns respect and classical architecture commands it, I guess. I feel like Donald Trump demands respect and still can't get it. But
yeah, I don't want my architecture to command anything. I think I just want it to be there and be nice looking and functional, I suppose.
Yeah.
This is what Nazis do, because that's what they wanted it to do.
Yeah.
They wanted it to be feared and respected and powerful, not beautiful. It's a byproduct of, it was pretty, but also it makes you think of like how strong and tough and great our ancestors were that weren't our ancestors, but that's great anyway.
And then meanwhile, in addition, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're doing Arch, and everyone's excited about that.
I can't.
I was also going to work a joke in about that. It's going to be big and beautiful. I don't... Yeah.
What more do you need to know than that it's modeled after something Napoleon Bonaparte did? Like, it's not a secret. We get what kind of a dude he is.
I mean, he said it's for him. He
said it's for him.
It's for me. That's when asked. He said it's
He
for
also
me. So
said
it couldn't be more
it's
clear.
gonna blow that one away. It's gonna
Yeah.
because that's what art is for, is to be better than other art.
Everything's a competition, Deon.
Yeah.
Everything's a competition.
It is kind of the, as you were saying, like the commanding thing. I don't know. You can disagree with me. I don't find it necessarily pretty. It does have that kind of daunting feel to it, especially like the way the bird is positioned on top of it. Like, I don't know. I
Imposing.
can imagine standing there. Yeah, imposing. Feeling like, oh, okay, this is a bit much, a bit overwhelming, and not a good way.
I mean, we're only in year 1. By the time he's done, that whole city's going to be gilded in gold, and there's going to be 10 monuments to him.
Where does a gold leaf get imported from?
Home Depot's spray paint department.
Yeah, tariff free.
Saying maybe they don't have a tariff.
Okay, so that's what happens when you put one dude with bad taste in charge. I think Erin was already headed in the direction of more like citizens councils and things like that could actually have a role to play. But we have some more answers on how to move society in the direction of valuing beauty. And I'm trying to not use the word imposing it, but, like imposing a requirement for beauty on construction, right? So one example is this article from sustainabilitydirectory.com. Says zoning incentives mandate private developers create public open space. So, I mean, I found this just because I went looking for, okay, how do we make sure that beautiful open spaces get created? Are there policies that help make this happen? And the answer is yes, this does already exist. So there's a policy called POPs, privately owned public spaces. And it says, quote, cities are aggressively refining zoning to mandate the creation of privately owned public spaces in exchange for development bonuses. This mechanism shifts the cost of creating and maintaining vital urban amenities like plazas and arcades from the public budget to private developers, enabling higher density without sacrificing livability. The core finding is that over 590 POPs in New York City alone contribute over 3.8 million square feet of public space, equivalent to 9 major city parks, end quote. And what I was looking for was, how do we align the incentives of capitalism with beauty? Because they seem diametrically opposed. And so capitalism is going to capitalism, and we're all stuck with our very efficient and profitable gray boxes that we hate. And so then government has to come in and like spend a bunch of money to counteract that problem created by the capitalism that our government is allowing to flourish. So like, how do we bend that curve a little bit? And this was one of the things that came up, is like still using the power of the state, imposing regulations, but sort of taking the desire of private developers to build and saying, sort of in the way that you would say, like, look, if you want to build these high-priced homes and apartments, you need to build affordable housing at the same time. Same idea. If you want to build a big building, we'll let you build it a little bit taller, but you have to build a park that can be enjoyed by the people at the same time. And I would imagine that it's a mixed bag. What I was reminded of, and I didn't go looking into this, but Zuccotti Park in New York City, famous for being the site of Occupy Wall Street. I remember at the time hearing about Occupy Wall Street and learning that it was like this kind of public park, right? It's this place in downtown New York by Wall Street, Zuccotti Park, and it's kind of public, but it's privately owned. And then I remember how people described it, and it's, like 95% cement. So your definition of a park and beauty might be strained a little bit by looking at Zuccotti Park and seeing it as this like example of POPs, but it's probably not anything a little bit more regulation wouldn't be able to fix. Like, yeah, okay, good start, but it needs to be prettier than that.
I'm so sorry, Jay. I'm like such a skeptic on this.
Sure.
I kind of wondered when I was reading it what the angle was going to be. My first thought was like, man, we'll do anything but tax corporations
Exactly.
and
I had the same
billionaires.
thought. Yeah.
Yeah. I know.
But,
I know.
you know, this is not the exact same thing, but it is to me very parallel. I know I've spoken about this multiple times on the show, but there's a project in Atlanta. It's called the Beltline, and it's exactly what Jay referenced, which is public land that has then become privately owned and developed, but still is utilized as a public space. And slowly but surely, over the past 2 years, more businesses have come in, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it drives the taxes up, it drives home prices up. And these are historically Black neighborhoods. I have a lot of elderly neighbors that end up losing their homes because they can't afford to live there any longer. But my big thing, the heavy on the regulation part of this, because, what ends up happening is capitalism capitals this public area where you've always been able to go ride your bike, walk, run, whatever you want to do along this path, has now installed like paid parking.
Hmm.
And they get you because they're like, oh, you get the first 2 hours free. And okay, but you've now put all these restaurants, the belt line is longer, you might be out there longer. I've just recently been informed that the cost of like accidentally going over your time and not renewing it is an $85 fee.
Oh my God.
Oof.
Yeah.
Oh,
And like again, yes, okay, maybe you can blame the people who accidentally let it over, but you have to think that the main function of this is for physical activity, people who aren't necessarily checking their time or on their phones while they're, participating, and to come back and then get hit with such a heavy fine from a private company that's operating this parking lot that has been free for however many years this has been paved up until about 6 months ago. So I take this as a cautionary tale. It doesn't mean that partnership or legislation can't be built or designed better to ensure that there's accountability, to ensure that this doesn't become another way for a company to make money off of others. But I'm just really skeptical about the regulation part because often this is what happens. It goes unregulated and they find more and more ways of getting capital out of people.
If a private company finds you for parking, how do they enforce that? Because I would say, fuck off, you're never getting my $85.
So at least it's not a criminal courts thing. It's a civil courts, but they can still take you
Okay.
to court
Yeah.
for it. So you'd be gambling.
yeah, right. I mean, as you said, Erin, like, first of all, if you're building a public space, the idea is for people to use it. But if you have disincentives, well, constraints on your use of a public space, then it is no longer really a public space because a public space should be
Yeah.
completely open and free, and you shouldn't have to worry about those things. And you shouldn't have to worry about how much time you've spent there and whether you need to run back to your car or, whatever it might be. But I mean, as you were saying, as I think we all agree, like, why on earth do we have to do it through this mechanism? Like, I think that public spaces should be driven by the public. There should be commissions and review boards and whatnot that are driving, like, hey, we need a park in this space. This community needs a park and needs an outdoor space. Let's talk about designing it. Let's use public funds. We're all paying taxes here. Why don't we, or I say we're all paying taxes, but the corporations clearly aren't. Maybe we could tax corporations and have a bigger pool of money to work with to build public spaces and deliver services to people. This is what we're stuck in right now. Like, I give whoever came up with this idea credit for trying to work within a system that is difficult and crippling us and pulling resources away from community and public projects. But man, there is a solution. It's enforcing taxation on corporations and making sure we can do something with that money that is driven by public need and public input.
What Erin said was, we are now paying taxes to corporations because that's what that fine is, just a tax for using their space. You said driven and driving over and over again. And we haven't hit this during this whole conversation, is that most of this architecture issue that we have in all of our cities is, I think we've talked about this in the past, but it's because of cars. Like, our towns are designed for cars. Our parking lots, just the ugly cement wastelands, is all about cars. You shouldn't have to go park at the Beltline. You should be able to take a train, hop off, and go to the
Yeah.
Beltline. Like, all of that stuff. Like, I think about, where I was born all the time, Kansas City. It used to be a very pretty place, turn of the century. You can see all these aerial photos from, turn of the century and now, and all the spots that used to be pretty are just pavement. It's just parking lots because of the highway that went through, and now you have to find a place for cars, and everything is designed around cars. And this highway is already hideous, so why would you put something beautiful by the highway? It doesn't matter because it's already ugly. So all of this is car based. Our whole society is car based. It's not made for people, it's made for the vehicles driving us around. It's backwards at best, but until we do something about that, like, you can have a corporation build these third spaces, but if you still have to buy a car, maintain a car, find a place for all these cars, that's going to be a huge part of the design of that third space.
I would absolutely put the existence of cars in the category of ugliness that this entire movement should be fighting against. Like, if we're fighting against
Yeah.
ugly architecture, then we should understand the existence of cars as part of that ugliness. It can absolutely be seen holistically and coherently that way.
Parking lots are ugly.
So this next article gets more into not so much giving benefits to corporations for them building public spaces, but just straight up regulation. There's zoning regulation, and then this takes it to sort of the next level and is talking about architectural guidelines, regulations that are architectural guidelines that help shape cities. And it says, quote, while zoning regulations are essential in urban planning, they often fall short in creating the character and soul of a city. This is where architectural guidelines or standards come in, offering a more nuanced and sometimes comprehensive approach to shaping our urban environments. Far more than just rules for building designs, these guidelines are the foundation of our urban experience, crafting spaces that reflect the identity and functionality of a city, end quote. And what I'm hoping is that we're in an age now of government reawakening to the idea of using powers it forgot it had. For decades, people in politics have felt constrained by the seeming need to do whatever corporations want, to give them the access to build what you're going to build, give us jobs, like, please just let the market do what the market is going to do. And I think we are having a slow awakening as the age of neoliberalism hopefully comes to a close. So part of that is maybe corporations don't just get to have everything they want all the time. And one of those things can be like, oh, we can actually insist on beauty. And this is why I wanted to put cars right in that category. Is like, oh, maybe we can insist on cars not being part of our core downtown space, for instance. So, like, pedestrian zones are becoming more of a thing. They are beginning to spread and people like them. And so it is another of these things that it is at odds with what capital would like. Capital would like for cars to be able to come directly to their businesses, or for privately owned parking spaces to be metered, and for cars to be able to drive up and unload cash into those parking meters. But people would prefer spaces to be walkable. People would prefer for spaces to be beautiful, and not just the facades of buildings, but also get those fucking cars out of my pedestrian area. I'm trying to, like, walk here with my family, right? And so it is the job of everyone to help instill that kind of energy into elected officials who can recognize, oh, we do have the power to do that. We have the power to insist that our towns be built in a beautiful way and maintained in a beautiful way. And that if there are areas where we don't want there to be cars, we can tell them to fuck off as well.
We have this little event called Third Thursday in my town. And every third Thursday, about a 3 to 4 block area downtown is blocked off where cars can't go. People show up, businesses put out their stuff on the main street. Like, they put stuff on the sidewalks, everybody's walking, you can walk down the street. It's very popular. We only do it once a month for, I think, 9 months a year. And it's a huge hit. Why we can't do that more often, why that can't just be the norm in that little area, I'm not sure, because It's very good for business. It's very popular. They make more money on that day than they make any other time. So even like financially, it's actually a good idea. And it's great for community building. It's good for people to just walk around and be. And that little stretch of the town, the city has spent a lot of time making it more beautiful. They put up new lamp posts. They spent a lot of money on sidewalks and just like aesthetic things that do make it more desirable. You go a couple blocks down and it still looks terrible. If they could add to that, and like I know it's the cost thing. Like that's the huge part of this. It costs money to do the things to make things pretty. But if you could go further down and make that whole section look nicer, it's beneficial to everyone. And again, like you could have it to where cars are just not allowed because we do it and people are craving this. I know that people are craving this. Going back to the drive-throughs and why drive-through restaurants, fast food restaurants look the way they do. Convenience. Just push as many people through as possible. And that's fine for business for a while until all the businesses do that. And then it's not good for businesses because they're indistinguishable and they're all the same slop. There's nothing special about any of them. If we could go back to having some unique individual places, maybe you would want to take your kids to a Burger King to have a party for no other reason than kids want to be there, because no kid wants to be in a little box now. There's no reason to be there. These are all things that I think people feel innately, but aren't really talking about yet. And hopefully people will start talking about it more, and because this is the way that people want to do it.
I think people are recently like waking up to the systemic issue of this in the way that enshittification has become mainstream. Like this is an extension of enshittification, right? To have ugly towns or boxes everywhere you look, that kind of thing. But I was going to say a good example of what this article is talking about, the guidelines shaping a city. So Jay and I both lived in DC for many, many years. I went to school there and stayed and lived there for a long time after. And DC has a height limit on its buildings, and it has since, well, actually the late 1800s, but it was updated a few times. The last one was, I think, around 1910. And Congress implemented the height rule because a developer came in and built a very tall building. It still exists. It is beautiful. It's called the Cairo. It's now like a condo and apartment building. It was once the Cairo Hotel. And everybody got a little nervous that these very high-rise buildings were going to just change the whole feeling of the city. So they put a restriction, and I believe at least now it's been amended and changed over the years. I think now you can only have 10 floors of a residential building, but if it's office or whatever, it has to be a little lower than that. And there are many, many perspectives on whether or not this is good, because obviously DC needs housing. Maybe you need higher buildings to have more housing. There's a lot of conversations about how that could be amended and changed. But I will say this, DC is a beautiful city. And part of that is because you can walk down broad streets and see the sky. It's not claustrophobic because you are just walking through giant alleyways of huge, huge skyscrapers. And look, New York has always been that way. So it's got that aesthetic, and it's probably always going to have that aesthetic. But DC didn't, and they didn't want it to change. And again, you certainly can make arguments that are people focused for how we can amend that rule to improve people's lives. But overall, is it better for DC to have lower buildings? I would argue yes, because there's more light in the streets, and that's a more pleasant experience to live in. It makes the neoclassical architecture be reflected in the sun and look even nicer. If it was all in shadow, you wouldn't have that same feeling. So that is an example of a way that guidelines can help preserve beauty in a city, but also make sure that the people living there, that their quality of life is improved at the same time.
And not to bring it back to Atlanta, but I'm going to bring it back to Atlanta to counterbalance that. They took this public space that used to be railroads. They made it a walking path. It was aesthetically beautiful. People, of course, started utilizing it, making it part of their daily routines. And then developers came in. And now what you see when you're walking along it is a lot of apartment buildings that don't have those height restrictions. So you've taken what should be now a green space for the city, and you're more or less bringing tall buildings that used to just exclusively live downtown to like more residential areas where there's houses. So yeah, I like that you mentioned the thing about DC, because it lets me know that this is possible when your local government is conscientious of those things.
Well, Congress did pass this law because it was DC. So I guess,
Yeah.
maybe it was more complicated.
Yeah, but the thing is, why don't other cities? And that would be my question too. Obviously, I'm not online with any council members right now for Atlanta, but that would be my question. Like, why wasn't there regulation, especially when the need for a green space was recognized, but now it's been converted into something else because of the developers and the lack of regulation on them?
Yeah. And, of course, it's always about short-term priorities and fighting against those, which is why when it comes to building beautifully, we shouldn't allow developers with short-term priorities to be the ones to make decisions and impose their designs on the rest of us. I mean, I was just thinking about how the way GDP is calculated, that waste is beneficial, like waste is profitable. So if we built a new building and tore it down and built a new one in the same place every year, that's more GDP, that's more profitable. And so someone's paying for it, right? And how we as a society decide like what's good and cost effective and how do we save money, you can only do that by thinking long term. So that brings us to this piece. The most sustainable building is one too beautiful to tear down. And so this is a sustainability advocate who's actually coming around to seeing sustainability more holistically. Obviously, people in sustainability weren't in favor of tearing buildings down willy-nilly, but the way we construct buildings, which means the way we insist that buildings be constructed by developers who will not, in their own short-term incentive, necessarily do what is good long-term. How we insist buildings are created will have a huge impact on how long they last. So this writer says, quote, 2 years ago, I wrote in Green Building Advisor, windows are carbon intensive and a source of air leakage, so let's make them smaller. But another advocate, Heshmati, he refers to, explained, most of our light environments today are designed for vision when we need far higher lighting levels for our health. Then, another advocate, Hermansdorfer, raises another point that resonated. Future flexibility vanishes. That ground floor designed for retail with 2.7 meter ceilings, it can never become a restaurant, co-working space, or workshop. We're locking in obsolescence from day one. Meanwhile, European cities prove buildings can reinvent themselves for centuries, end quote. But he goes on and says, when it comes to full life cycle carbon assessments, we shouldn't make design choices that prioritize short-term carbon accounting over long-term livability. We might need a bit more ceiling height and a lot more beauty. And then finally, I'm just going to end with this on this article. He says, quote, the buildings that survive aren't just functionally adaptable. They're designed with care, proportion, and beauty that makes demolition feel like vandalism. Cities preserve what they love. The most sustainable building is one too beautiful to tear down. And so thinking about it in that way should change things for a lot of people, that you can kind of understand where he was coming from initially. It's like, well, if windows are a source of leaking energy, we should have smaller windows. But you got to think about what humans actually need, what they love, and like building something that people fall in love with, care about, is a huge element that has been overlooked so much, like not just in sustainability building, but in building in general. It's like we have just allowed so often ugly buildings to go up that people end up disliking, and that makes them less sustainable over time. They are more likely to be torn down if people don't like them. So if you want for things to last a long time, if you don't want for there to be waste for the sake of the environment, then things need to be beautiful. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the climate movement, and that was not a major point of discussion when I was in there, but I think it probably is now.
Yeah, and bringing it back to pride. Beauty and pride are related. And if you have pride in something or your surroundings, where you're from, I'm thinking about that courthouse you told us about, Deon. Like, No one has pride in that ugly courthouse, right? So what are the chances
Oh.
that in 5 years, some developer is going to come in and say, hey, I got a new proposal for a new courthouse because you might like it better, right? But then all the waste that went into building that courthouse and then tearing it down so quickly is a huge, huge cost that doesn't get talked about.
This whole issue has been super personal for me because I'm just thinking about my town because we've gone through, like, it's been over 10 years. There was a major tornado that came through and it created an opportunity to do new building. Like, we'll say it that way in the most positive way a tragedy could be. And in a lot of spaces, there was an opportunity taken that made things more beautiful. Like, our library is incredible. I think I talked about it on the last episode. I love that library. I go there. Sometimes I just go there. If I need to do work for the podcast, I just go sit in the library. It's an amazing place. They built a bunch of houses
You mean the
that
Best of the Left podcast, wherever you get your podcast.
the best of the left. Yeah, exactly. That podcast that I work on. But they built a bunch of houses that, bringing it back to what Erin was talking about earlier, those kind of 2-story boxes. They built a bunch of those in residential neighborhoods that, just the nature of a tornado, it knocked down some houses and left some standing. Those places next to older, 100-year-old houses that have been there for a long time and are maintained, they look terrible anyway. They look out of place and terrible now because they're just not supposed to be there, and they will look more out of place over time. But also, there's this old building across the street from where I work. This just giant, massive brick building that's really pretty, like old red brick, and it had been empty for years and years and years. It was actually used. The only thing it was ever used for is a spook house on the floors that I'm not sure why they weren't condemned because I've been to it several times when it was. It was terrifying because it was an old, scary, empty building. But a local developer bought it, renovated it. There's a bunch of businesses in there now. It's really cool, but it was too pretty to tear down, just like what Jay was talking about. Like, the city had talked about it for years and years. Should we just tear it down? Somebody will buy it eventually, right? Somebody did buy it. Somebody's fixing it up. It looks great. There's a down the street from that. Like, my town is an old mining town, so think about the aesthetic of that. If you've ever been to an old mining town with a downtown that has old brick buildings, that's what it looks like. Further down, there was a building that fell down, and what was put in its place wasn't some out of place monstrosity. Someone built a kind of a replica brick building that fits. It looks good. It will always look like it belongs to the town, and the older it gets, the more it will look like it belongs there. That can be done. It doesn't have to be the quickest, cheapest, most cost effective. It could just be what fits what this place looks like. And there have been some decisions made that make things fit, and there have been some decisions made that make things look way out of place. I wish there had been more coordination and more of like a citizens council to decide all these things, but there wasn't. But some of the decisions are good, and some of them will, 100 years from now, people won't know that that new building wasn't new.
So a few years ago, I read this book called Houses for the People by Eric Klinenberg. And I remember one of the things that like really stuck with me, and bear with me if I don't get every detail perfect. It was a few years ago. But in it, he talks about these two different housing developments and how drastically different like they ended up going once people were living in them. And so you had one that ended up having a lot of crime, vandalism. People were more afraid to live in the area. They didn't feel as comfortable. And then the other one went a lot better. And it turns out a big reason why was the architecture and how it was designed. So the first one was built like typical apartment complexes where you have your space, but otherwise there's not really shared space. Like once you get to the bottom, there's maybe a little courtyard, but that's about it. So what ends up happening, residents don't actually know who lives there. They don't get to know their neighbors. They don't have any pride in the building. And so the downside of it to me feels very natural compared to the other housing development where they built it so that 4 places shared an outdoor area, like a little green
Mm.
space. And those residents felt more pride in where they were living. They felt personal responsibility for that shared area and making sure that their neighbors had a clean, safe area for them to, also visit or take advantage of. So to me, those comparisons are perfect of like the thought that needs to go into how we design. Yes, of course, people try to maximize profits, but I think this is when regulation and mandating beauty really come in, is that like when you feel that pride, when you have that attachment, as this article references, like the more beautiful it is, the harder it is to tear it down. I think that just about living spaces. Like, the more you take pride in the place that you live in, the more like shared and communal feelings you get from it, the better chance that the building's going to last a lot longer.
So the connection between people and buildings is where we want to end the show today. And this article from the Public Discourse is just like a love letter to beauty in architecture and how it helps connect us to the place where we live. So after talking about Notre Dame and the US Capitol building and the fire at Notre Dame and the Capitol riot at the Capitol, the writer says, when I stand before the Capitol or Notre Dame, I do not feel a sense of intimidation or alienation despite their grandeur. To the contrary, their beauty reveals a face of love in which I recognize myself. That is why buildings can be loved, and indeed why they must be if our longing for home is to be satisfied. If I cannot recognize myself in the built environment, if all I perceive are lifeless, functional entities, I am condemned to a life of loveless estrangement. And in this one, you might also swap in the term culture of convenience, where he uses a different term. He says, quote, warring against beauty is one of the primary features of this culture of immediacy that is the pervasive feature of our contemporary predicament. By a culture of immediacy, I mean one that thinks only in terms of the present at the expense of past and future, and one that caters solely to the needs of the current generation. Then he goes on to highlight another moment in time when the pursuit of beauty was perhaps consciously cast aside. It says, quote, when the Soviets conquered and ruled Eastern Europe after 1945, they declared war on religion and culture. For them, both typified the false consciousness of the bourgeoisie, a false consciousness that served only to alienate its victims from their true nature as purely natural beings. Historical materialism would eliminate this false consciousness for the sake of the authentic identity of what many called the new socialist man, end quote. And I got to say, like, he doesn't go into that much detail, but I have always wondered why Soviet architecture is synonymous with drab, brutalist, gray concrete blocks. I once asked a smart friend of mine about this, and they pointed to the economic devastation after the World War, and the Soviet Union obviously didn't have that much money. And so the relative cheapness of unpainted concrete may have played a factor. This is also true. There may have been more to it, and it could have been philosophical. The two could work in tandem. Like, it could have been the economic reality of the post-war years, but in Soviet style, sort of needed a philosophical fig leaf to excuse away, like, well, what we can afford to build is concrete blocks, but we're not going to say it's because we're down and out after the war. We're going to say it's because it's a revolutionary philosophical argument for utilitarianism. Like, it's hard to say, and I haven't parsed through all that, but I find it confusing because when I think of socialists and communists, I tend to think of artists like Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, and they're like pro-worker murals and how deeply integrated art has always been in those kinds of movements. So like the whole socialist angle is interesting and gets brought up in this article. But like, even if you want to make the argument that the Soviet socialists totally failed to see the value in art and beauty, it cannot then be thought that, well, the polar opposite would deliver any better. That's why we began with the capitalist war against beauty for the sake of profit at the beginning of the show. So like, maybe if you go too far in either direction, you can easily end up in a bad place. But the realization that people perpetually end up coming back to is a lack of beauty, a lack of art, a lack of buildings that people can take pride in is deeply alienating to people. And beautiful artistic places that people love for reasons they may not even be able to explain themselves are absolutely integral to fighting off alienation and finding that connectedness with the places where we all live.
This was really beautiful article, and I feel like I could dig into a bunch of different pieces of it, but the part that kind of struck me, because I think I'd been looking for it for the past month, was the line, "In and through their beauty, we have a revelation of who we are at our best and where we have come from. That's why when they are consumed by fire or attacked by a mob, we perceive the destruction as something of a personal catastrophe. It is an attack on us, what we stand for, and what we value." And it was really the line, "who we are at our best and where we've come from," that kind of hit me, because I have been trying to analyze my feelings about Trump tearing down the East Wing and building this absurd ballroom, and it's a total disaster. So who knows what will actually happen in the end. But I was sort of angry at myself for feeling so much about a building, right? Like my initial reaction was like, it's just a building. Like, of all the things that he's done, this shouldn't get you so, deeply worked up. But reading this has really helped me understand those feelings much more deeply. And it may be that, like, somewhere deep down was a sense of national pride or just national connection. Maybe that's a better way to frame it, that I didn't really know I had. And that building meant something to me about the country we live in, that, we've all looked at that place and understood our history, maybe varying versions of it, but like our collective history to some degree, and saw our place in the history of this country through that building. Now, you may think, no, I've never done that. But I think on a deep, deep level, I think we do, because it's such a constant symbol, right? It's just always been there for our lifetimes. And so it does mean something. And, just the fact that the original building was built by slaves, and the fact that the leaders of the civil rights movement then walked through those halls and like met with President Johnson and fought for a better life for people and convinced Johnson to support them. Like, peace accords have been signed there, and also like major awful decisions that have led us, down the road to the hellscape we're in now. So it symbolizes everything, the good and the bad, where we come from, where we've been. And in that way, it symbolizes all of us. Like, how can it not? So when something like that gets desecrated, even though it's got this mixed bag of history behind it, logically, like, it seems like it should be arbitrary. It's just a building, but it is in fact a knife to the chest of our collective understanding of who we are. And no matter the myths that understanding was built on, like, it still means something, no matter how messy and complicated that feeling might be. And so I don't know, this really helped clarify a lot. And he said, it imposes a burden of responsibility. It is because, unlike the functional entity that merely serves my present and passing purposes, the beauty entity speaks of something greater than me. It is a symbol of homecoming, of what attaches us to a place, and of our will to survive come what may. All of that just hit me. Like, that is it. That's why I care. That's why I'm having an emotional reaction to this. It's complex, it's messy, but it's about who we are, who we have been, where we're going, where I hope we're going, where I hope we're not going, all of it in a building.
It's the most physical manifestation of what we're feeling about the Trump presidency, right? He's done all these things to destroy the government, but this is physically destroying the government, or at least the symbol of government, shaping things in his own image. Putting the gold everywhere is temporary. He knocked down the East Wing. It's gone. You can rebuild it as something else, but we'll know it got rebuilt. It's probably a similar effect of why 9/11 was so catastrophic for people, is because these two buildings that were in the skyline are no longer there. I mean, 2,000 plus people died, and that is a real tragedy. But the lasting effect of this skyline has changed. It hits you. Like, that's why these things matter. The fact that the Twin Towers were hideous and represented capital and all the things that were wrong with the country in a lot of people's eyes are probably exactly why they were targeted in the first place, right? These things do matter. Like, this rootedness that buildings have or create, that's a lot of why I feel the way. I've brought this up over and over again in my hometown. A lot of my hometown is hideous. And it's hideous because the main road is this strode that I think I've talked about on the show. I don't know if I've talked about it on the YouTube version, but it's this strode of these cookie cutter box restaurants and power lines and billboards, and it's ugly, and it creates the opposite of pride in your town. It creates like this animosity, this resentment, because these things matter. But that's what this town kind of is now. That's what it looks like. The East Wing being this representation of probably the good things about the White House. That's the East Wing was probably the good things about what happened in the White House, right? Like people got to go and visit publicly, and
Right.
that
the
was
tours, yeah.
the tours. That's the citizens' connection to the White House. And that's gone, and it's going to be replaced by whatever gaudy nonsense that Biff Tannen wants to put up, you know? And that's just going to be there. And it will affect things. Like, you know, working on currently an episode about Trump and his dictatorial predilections on the Best of the Left, wherever you get your podcast. That'll come up because this is things that dictators do. They want to reshape the world in their own image, and a lot of times they want to do it physically. That's why, you know, everything is computer. Now we build Ark or whatever he said. Like, that's why he wants to do that, because he wants a physical monument to himself. Like a lot of people, the greater presidents or whatever, like we build monuments to them, great people. Like it's kind of a thing we do. But very rarely do people build monuments to themselves while they're still alive.
Yeah,
And those
for
are
sure.
always the worst people. Always the worst people. Without question.
What?
Yeah, no, yes. Erin, we talk about this offline all the time, how much Erin likes Trump. And eventually we're going to get Erin to not like Trump.
Yeah.
You're going to come around. You are going to come around.
You see that arch.
Maybe. I don't. I'm pretty excited. I don't know if my bird spiel captured that, but I'm really excited for, what is it, Arc Day
Oh,
Trump?
God.
Or
Yeah. My favorite take on it, tying this whole show together, is that it won't just be one arc, but two, to be reminiscent of the McDonald's golden arches that he loves so much.
Oh, yeah.
That does tie it together.
Okay, so to wrap up, hearkening all the way back to the video we talked about near the beginning about everything modern being ugly and the guy walking around London and talking, he says, quote, "Walking around a city, any city, and looking at its buildings and its infrastructure, you're not just looking at objects, you're looking at religions and principles, beliefs and ideas. These buildings, they don't just look different, they represent fundamentally different worldviews, clashing ideas about how we should all think, live, and behave. And those skyscrapers say the same thing as our air conditioning units and sewage plants, that we have become a society of convenience above all else. Modern design tells the truth very loudly, that we are technologically superior and very efficient, but also a little bit boring and unimaginative. And it says that we no longer believe in the idea of ordinary beauty or in the idea of a public that deserves ordinary beauty," end quote. To which I will say, with a call to action, that we can do something different. That is the big takeaway, is it feels like this is the natural progression of things because for decades we have submitted to the seeming like irresistible will of the market. But it doesn't have to be that way. This year, Art Deco, one of my favorite design styles, turned 100 years old. And so as we close out 2025, we are leaving you with a call to spark a new movement for beauty with a sort of modern twist. Our aesthetic environment, from Millennial Gray interiors to gray box fast food restaurants, exposes what our economic system truly values: profit over beauty, convenience for capital over meaning for people. Meanwhile, people like Trump, cynical populists, weaponize beauty because they know that it's what people want, but they only grant it when it doesn't threaten capital or serves their own power. But history, in the form of the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements, shows another way. They emerged during similar periods of economic transition and technological disruption, offering clear philosophical alternatives to what was then the dominant utilitarian thinking of the time. They proved that movements for beauty can reshape entire cultures. And we now understand that beauty has real substantive value that's worth the cost. I'm not saying they didn't know that 100 years ago, but it does feel like we forgot it for a little while. Plus, we understand that people want it. They have been pushed to the point, just like with COVID and Millennial Gray, like they've been pushed to the point that they recognize they want something different and are willing to demand something other than what market forces would grant. Today, we have new tools that they lacked 100 years ago. We can have much better participatory planning that helps democratize design decisions, proven regulatory mechanisms that help improve public beauty and insist on aesthetics being legally binding. And so what we need now is to sort of unite these elements into a cohesive movement with a clear identity, compelling vision, and democratic foundation. So it's not beauty imposed from above, particularly when coming from a single dude with no taste, but beauty created through collective action, communities reclaiming the right to shape spaces that reflect human values rather than market logic. So I've been pondering names for this. I'm a fan of the Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements. And so what I came up with is I'm proposing like art populi or art civis, art for the people or art of the citizens, something like that. Just proposals. And so now we need artists and designers to jump in. Like this is not our job, but write manifestos, build coalitions, design their designs, and bring beauty back to the people. The people want it. The people will help if it is seen as something that's possible. And to make it possible, we just have to decide that it is. That's the secret of humanity, actually. So to fight the scourge of alienation we're all feeling right now, even if we don't know why, I think that this is one of the major paths forward that we have to take. The regulatory tools exist. The political will is building. The historical precedent is clear. And the only question is, who will join the movement and help give it form? Did we solve it?
All right. Ending with a movement is a good way to end. Start a movement. Hell yeah.
Might be the most solved.
Yeah.
The most solved anything's ever been. Great. Well, if you want to join the movement, I don't know that we'll be the head of the movement or anything. It's not really our expertise, but you should send us a message. You can leave us a voicemail or text at 202-999-3991. Send an email to j@bestofleft.com or reach us on signal at bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening. And remember that this is all really happening. So continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.